Hey, so in this video we continue the Jess Franco collection series, and this time I picked the movies which are roughly from the same period. They're both from early 70s. They were first released in Germany around 1971, and Jess Franco directed these films for German film mogul Otto Brauner, and it's part of a package of films he's made between 1969 and 1970. Most of those movies were starring Soledad Miranda, so probably one of the most famous Jess Franco films, Vampiros Lesbos or Vampiros Lesbos, depending how you want to pronounce that. And the second movie is X312, Flight to Hell, which gets talked about a lot less because unfortunately, by the time Jess Franco got around to rolling this one, Soledad Miranda had already perished in a tragic car crash, so she didn't get to star in it, which is a shame. Nevertheless, X312 Flight to Hell has its moments. It's a nice jungle adventure with one of the most absurd and low-budget looking plane crashes I've ever seen. X312 stars Fernando Sancho, who has had a massive career acting in the westerns in the 1960s, and he's also popped up in the second Blind Dead movie for Armando de Osorio, and he's also been one of the bad guys in Dr. Orloff's, what was it called? Dr. Orloff's Invisible Man. It's the Eurocine movie with this man in the ape suit, kind of invisible gorilla character. And there is Howard Vernon as well in X312, the regular, the Jess Franco regular. On the cover here you also see Gela von Weitershausen, who's this German actor who was also in Bloody Friday, which is this Italian-German heist movie with, what was his name, Raymond Harmsdorf, which was like a notoriously violent and for a long time hard to see movie. And it's an interesting one because it's a very nasty bank robbery movie. I should cover it sometime. I'm not sure if it ever had an English release, that movie. The German title translates as Bloody Friday, and then it has a completely different title for its Italian release. Back to X312. The basic plot is a bunch of characters board a plane, I think somewhere in Brazil. They take off, and then there is among them there is our hero, who's played by Thomas Hunter, who's this really good American actor who's had a career, I think, chiefly in Europe. He's also, I believe, written quite a famous movie. And Thomas Hunter narrates the film. Most of the film occurs in flashback, and basically at some point they change into a smaller plane, and that plane ends up crashing in the jungle somewhere in South America, and you get everything you really expect, like some stock footage of some exotic animals, and there are those, you know, palm trees, and they kind of camp out by this muddy river, and there are even natives, savage natives, who like shoot one of the, you know, people who survived the plane crash full of arrows. So there is a little bit of violence in X312, but it's basically quite a straightforward adventure movie. The story, which is co-credited to producer Brauner, is very boring and one-dimensional, so some of the dialogue is really impossibly banal, which robs the movie of some of its charm. As to the music, I think most of the cues for X312 were culled from some library tracks from some previous Otto Brauner films, So I don't think there was much original music composed for it, so it's not the most standout soundtrack for a Jess Franco movie, but nevertheless I enjoy it. It doesn't always really beautifully fit the scenes, but when it does, then you know, you get nice atmospheric touches there. Howard Vernon has an interesting part, which he basically has this mustache, and he plays a Latino character, so he's plastered with makeup, and he's this kind of quite outrageous bandido, you know, and his sidekick, or his girlfriend, is played by the actress Benny Cardoso, who interestingly also shows up very briefly in Vampiros Lesbos as the murdered woman. I think she's basically just a corpse in Vampiros Lesbos, which indicates that both movies were made very much back to back, sharing a lot of the same cast. Both movies also star Paul Muller, who was in a bunch of Italian movies. He was in Treasure Island with Orson Welles. He was the lead in Jess Franco's excellent film Eugénie de Sade. Paul Muller is a veteran Swiss actor. He's had like 100 movies to his credit, and he used to be on Facebook even. He used to answer messages, a very nice gentleman, and I wish him well. I hope he's doing well. 312 has very shaky, zoomy camera work, so I suspect a lot of it was handled by Jess himself, even though Manuel Merino is credited as a DOP, same as with Vampiros Lesbos, but both movies have those undeniable Jess Franco touches where, you know, once the camera zooms in a bit closer, then we lose focus, and the camera operator doesn't bother to refocus, so he just lets the camera sit on this blurry image for quite a while, which is, some people really hate Jess Franco for that, and I used to be one of those haters myself in my early time with Jess, which was a rough time. So let's switch over a little bit to Vampiros Lesbos. That's one of the better known Jess Franco movies out there. I have the Severin Blu-ray. There are several Blu-ray incarnations of Vampiros Lesbos. One of them is a beautiful German Blu-ray, but this here is the US release from 2015, and it features one of the final Jess Franco interviews before he sadly died. Vampiros Lesbos is, it was partially made in Istanbul. They shot at least a weekend in Istanbul, and it's obviously a showcase for Soledad Miranda, who has very few lines. We barely see her speak in the movie. A lot of her speech occurs offline, so it could have been dubbed in late, and she's this enigmatic, very slim and slender and exquisite looking female vampire, and she seduces Eva Stromberg. Eva Stromberg is in both of these movies as well. She's this blonde, I believe she's of Nordic origin, possibly Swedish, and she was in a couple of later day Edgar Wallace movies, the color ones. She popped up in those, and she was obviously under contract with Arthur Brauner, and she ended up in these Jess Franco movies. She was also in the Vengeance of Dr. Mabuse, and she's this blue-eyed blonde presence, so there is a great contrast between her presence and Soledad Miranda's presence, and their romance is, let's say, it's unusual, and it's nice because it's something some people would say it's completely unrealistic, but hey, life is crazy. There are all kinds of people romancing all kinds of people. So Vampiros Lesbos is very slow moving, and just for shots to change, sometimes you have to wait and wait, because there's literally just some of the shots get held for a very long time, and it's I guess it's a love it or hate it movie. It also really depends what kind of music you're into. Vampiros Lesbos got relaunched in the 90s thanks to the soundtrack, and has kind of continued in the pop culture scene as this iconic Euro cult movie, and I think it helped in many ways to elevate Jess Franco's movie out of obscurity, and it's great that we're living this digital renaissance of Jess Franco's movies. Vampirus Lesbos is a very, very vague riff on Bram Stoker's Dracula. So you have the Jonathan Harker character played by Eva Stromberg, who's named Linda Westinghouse, and she comes to the island to visit Nadine Korody, played by Soledad Miranda, and this vampire can walk in the daylight and, you know, basically do anything normal humans do, but she does occasionally drink blood, which basically looks like red wine mainly. So when the two characters drink blood, it's basically a large pitcher of what looks like red wine or grape juice or something. There are no special effects whatsoever in these movies. They're both, they have great, interesting cast, very, very interestingly chosen character actors, and they have unusual locations. So X-312 was partially shot in Latin America, I believe, and Vampirus Lesbos was made between Spain and Germany, and not to forget the brief shots of Istanbul, which look fantastic. Looking at the city in those days, those unusual cars, those strange tilted camera angles looking up at the mosques. It's a trip. This movie is a trip. Vampirus Lesbos was one of my earlier Jess Franco experiences, and that was one of the movies where I was only just beginning to embrace Jess Franco's manner of putting his movies together, and I was still, you know, discovering what he was into and what he was about, really. So definitely not the one to miss, Vampirus Lesbos. Even though you may not love it and embrace it, I think it's an experience which will at least open up some new horizons to film lovers who have previously only been familiar with more mainstream vampire films. Another interesting female vampire movie from another Spanish director I could sort of recommend would be Vampires by José Ramón Larraz. And that's again a story of female friendship framed by occasional bloody vignettes, but it's a completely different style from Vampirus Lesbos. So those two movies, both made by Spaniards abroad, with similar titles, but have completely contrasting, very different pacing and style. So these are early 1970s Jess Franco movies for producer Arthur Brauner, and they share a lot of the same cast. And both movies are about 90 minutes long, and I believe X-312 is not yet available on Blu-ray. I have a hunch it might hit Blu-ray in 2022, but it's just my hunch. I have absolutely no inside information on any releases. I'm sure if you're watching this video, then you probably have seen Vampirus Lesbos, and I would like to hear from you. Do you like it? Do you think it's the best Jess Franco could give us? I personally prefer Eugenie de Sade to Vampirus Lesbos, but that doesn't mean that I have no affection for Vampirus Lesbos. Hence its presence in my collection. Thanks so much for watching. Do subscribe to my channel and share this video around. I'll see you. Bye-bye.